My question today's anatomy question. I was practicing this pose this morning, Mary, and I was thinking of you because it's something that I've kind of found in my practice. It's a movement, but it's a variation of Supta Padangustasana that's elevated. And I've never taught it before, and I was thinking of teaching it this weekend in a workshop, and then I thought, let me run this by Mary. Because of course, ahimsa, my first query, I'm very mindful that my body is not everybody's body.
Yeah.
And as a yoga teacher and as someone who's been practicing for a couple years, and also just genetically, I'm flexible. And so sometimes I need to remind myself, this pose that feels delicious in my body might feel horrible or possibly be injurious to a non-flexible body. Okay, so let me show you.
I have to tell you a funny bit from your mom. Your mom likes to say that a millimeter separates heaven and hell.
Exactly. Okay, let me take off my sweater for a moment so you can see more clearly what I'm doing. Okay, so I've just got a bolster, and what I've been doing recently that feels so delicious is sitting my hips on the bolster and then lifting my leg up in Supta Padangustasana and just kind of playing here and letting gravity pull. I'm playing on this edge where gravity's pulling me off the bolster, and then of course doing a bunch of sort of leg variations, leg coming towards the towards the camera. And I thought potentially for a less flexible student it might be comfortable to bend the knee. But do you have any other thoughts about this variation for me?
So I love that for stretching the hip flexors, especially the psoas, because the bolster supports your pelvis. And I'm assuming, Lizzie, that you also had the bolster touching your bottom rib?
Yes, on the top. It was coming up to the rib, yes.
Yeah, the rule of rib. So that means your lumbar is supported, your pelvis is supported. What I would do for someone that has difficulty with the pose, I actually wouldn't have them bend the lower leg. I would have them bend the top leg.
Okay, say more about that. Why?
Because likely it's hamstring inhibition that makes the pose difficult for them.
Right.
But if you bend the lower leg knee, you're going to reduce the stretch sensation in the front of that hip.
Right.
You're going to take away some of the juiciness.
Right, okay.
But if you bend the top knee, you get the benefits of the stretch without getting caught up in your hamstring restriction.
Mm-hmm. And can you think of anywhere else? What I've been trying to feel in my body is I had this kind of idea that most of the time I feel hamstring stretch in yoga, I'm in a more forward bended position. And I was trying to think if there's any poses where I feel I'm stretching my hamstring, but I'm in extension in the low back. That's what this has, which somehow feels delicious. And I was thinking, like Parshvottanasana, I think teachers are always trying to get us into a back-bended state when we're standing like this. And then they're trying to get us to go in and back bend, and this feels really crummy. I like to let my students round slightly here and let this be a forward bend. But I don't know. Is that something? The idea of the back bend, that this pose, Supta Padangustasana, elevated on the bolster, is a back bend slightly passive for the lower back, but somehow also still stretching the hamstrings.
Well, yeah, because you're feeding two birds with one seed.
Mm-hmm.
So you have the supported back extension, the supported lumbar extension with hip extension, okay, on that lower leg.
Right.
But then you bring the other leg up towards your chest. Now, the question that I would ask myself is, what is my priority in the pose? And the way that I would answer that question, Lizzie, is my priority in the pose is the hip extension.
Okay, on the lower leg.
On the lower leg. Because the least efficient way to stretch your hamstrings is
Yeah.
to lay down on the floor and bring your leg up towards your body.
Yeah.
And when you combine lumbar extension, hip extension is part and parcel of that.
I see.
They go together.
Right. Like in a high lunge, not like a Vera one where you release the back foot. This is a back bend and hip extension.
Yes.
So I wanted to ask you a follow-up about this. When I was recently taking a bunch of Iyengar classes, we did this Supta Padangustasana several times over the course of 3 weeks. And what I noticed is I felt, I don't know, it wasn't really a feeling. It was more, maybe it was intellectual, I don't know. But what I was enjoying as I was drawing the top leg out to the side and over and doing some of these circles, I was wondering if I was doing something really healthy for the hip joint. Or is my hip joint getting that motion anyway when I walk and live my life? Like something, I almost had this image that I was kind of like lubricating my hip joint or so what is it that I
because you were. So, which is awesome. Again, this is one of the reasons why asana can be so healthy for the body, because asana mobilizes, it's really the only holistic system of health that uniquely mobilizes the joint segments of the body. And so what you're doing, especially when you're making circles with that top leg, you're like the witches in Macbeth. You're stirring the cauldron, right?
That's what I think.
Well, the hip joint is a ball and socket joint.
Right.
But how often in your daily life are you stirring the soup?
Right. Well, unless you go dancing.
Yeah, unless you go dancing. So what's nice about doing that, especially when you're down on the floor, is you've removed gravity, and you can then refine the movements to your needs in the moment. And you can look up at your foot and see, are you actually tracing a circular pattern or is it more of a triangle?
Right.
And that gives you an idea of the balance in the hip rotators.
Right.
So you can then take that information and make asana choices to address imbalances.
Okay, so let's transition back to the psoas. You talked a little bit about how this is a really strong stretch for the psoas. I feel as though this word is like a hot word in yoga, and it suddenly sort of appeared. Is the psoas? Can you tell us a little more about the psoas?
Your psoas attaches anteriorly, so you have two, and they're about forearm length, and it attaches to the front of T12, L1, L2, L3, and L4. So the attachments, Lizzie, go from the bottom of the ribs to your navel.
Whoa. And then
attach to the distal, to the lesser trochanter on your medial aspect of your femur, and slightly posterior. That's how big these muscles are. They're basically the length of your forearm.
And they're there to lift my leg?
They are a powerful hip flexor, but they're more than that. They're a lumbar flexor. They're a hip flexor. I believe the psoas governs the relationship between the body and the legs.
And so it's like such a popular word. Like, why is it such a buzz muscle? Like, people always talking about the psoas, the psoas, the psoas, because it's grumpy usually.
I laugh because this is so interesting to me because I've been a yoga practitioner for 25 years, and the psoas really became hip around 2008.
Yeah, it's like suddenly the psoas.
And it's like, what's the deal?
Yeah.
And so people are running around going, I have a grumpy psoas. And I'm like, how do you even know?
Yeah.
It's so deep in the body.
Yeah.
it's so deep in the body, you don't know. Odds
Yeah.
are you don't have a grumpy psoas. Odds are you have a grumpy rec fem and a grumpy pectineus and gracilis from sitting too
But
much.
those are harder to say than psoas.
They are, and they're not as provocative because the psoas is so deep in the body, and the psoas receives a lot of deep sensory input when we interact with gravity.
Okay.
So, especially for children who are like all kids are fidgeting, right? You want to settle a kid down, or you want to settle yourself down, have them do plank poses. Because it requires everyone to come to the party. And it provides so much deep sensory input through the psoas.
Okay, so if I'm sitting, I'm elevated a little bit on my cushion here, my meditation cushion, and I'm sitting here and I'm kind of, like when I rock or do tiny circles, I'm feeling a little bit of engagement there, where you were talking from T12 to L3, L4. Can I possibly be feeling my psoas working? It's like as I lean forward and then as I lean back, I feel something catch there in a healthy way, not in an unpleasant way.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when your knees are lower than your hips.
Yeah.
Because you're, in a sense, passively stretching the psoas as well.
Okay, I have to show you. I have to show you right now. We cannot keep talking about anatomy with one more second without. Can you see the pink?
Oh,
I was like, this is magic.
I can't believe you live there.
I know. Me neither sometimes. Okay, so the psoas, in conclusion, what do you want us to know more or less about the psoas? So that pose that I demonstrated earlier, you're saying that's a great psoas stretch. Is your idea for us we basically need to forget about the psoas, or it's getting stretched anyway in lunges, or what's your kind of feeling for us about this popular muscle?
Yeah, think about it less.
Okay.
Because when we start thinking about one muscle at a time, it's like missing the forest for the trees.
Yeah. And it's from here. It's like we're intellectualizing and breaking it. Only our brain would try to break apart the body, which is always working in concert.
Right. And this idea, and I've had so much anatomy training, and I've had gross anatomy, clinical kinesiology, I've done cadaver dissection labs, and this idea, which I bought into for a very long time, that there are approximately 600 muscles in the body,
right,
is really an intellectual construct. It's actually all one muscle.
Wait
the divisions.
Wait a second.
Yeah.
Really? Yeah, that's honestly how you think of it.
That's honestly how I think about it now. And I'm not, certainly there are fascial bundles and sacs. You remember a few weeks ago I said we're all just a bunch of sacs. That's true, but the sacs are all interconnected. And one of the things that has stuck with me so much I did a cadaver dissection immersion in 2015, and I was working on the upper back and shoulder, and I remember the relationship and the interconnectivity between the rhomboids and the upper trapezius, and it just blew my mind.
Okay.
Because I could slide my hand into the pocket formed by that muscle relationship, and that's when I really had this aha moment that these divisions are absolutely intellectual constructs that we're using to help develop understanding of the body, but in in some way that understanding is false because it's not based on anatomical reality and energetic reality.
Well, and what I find so poetic for our purposes is that, in fact, for yoga teachers and practitioners and all of the kind of health fields that are adjacent, it is really experiential. And that's what's so important. And so that's why our course is called Experiential Anatomy, of course, but it's not about memorizing muscles and names and facts and figures. But for us, it's really about, is it embodied? Do you understand the experience of the psoas? That's what I'm interested in, not whether you can sort of diagram it or name it. Reminds me, I've just pulled up, there's this quote I found this week from Donna Farhi that I think is so beautiful. Yoga is a pragmatic science where everything is tested and verified through direct experience.
In a nutshell.
In a nutshell. So, Mary Richards, thank you so much. Tell us where we can find you online on the internet.
At maryrichardsyoga.com and on Facebook at A Little Yoga Goes a Long Way.
Okay, come see me, come say hi at Lizzie Lasater on Facebook, on Instagram. And this course, of course, this information is all held on the site www.experientialanatomy.yoga. Okay, bye, Mary. See you next time.
Bye-bye, Lizzie.